How's it going, guys? Thanks for clicking on to this episode of the Phil Talk Sports Podcast. Joining me, making his return to the show, ASU alumni, your new favorite Sun Devil, Nick Rice. Congratulations, man, and welcome back.
Appreciate it. I'm going to spend most of the rest of this month traveling all over the world, man. And by the world, I mean just, Vegas here and a couple other places. So nothing too crazy, but very excited to be graduating. And, that diploma is going to be big things. So I can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe you'll actually take in some Sun Devils. Maybe you're going to have to actually start following them a little bit because technically that is your school now. So, that might matter to you here soon.
Right. Well, I want to pick it up just so that I can be against Hank when they beat Arizona 62-7 again, like they did a couple years ago. So I just want to be ready for that.
Yeah, next year I gotta have like both of you on like the week before and the week after, and we can have a rivalry going on the podcast. That would be pretty cool.
Well, in order to have a rivalry, both teams have to be evenly matched.
That's true. So we'll see. We'll see. I guess hiring a coach is gonna matter for that a little bit, and then Arizona has a similar thing. But yeah, that'll be that's a rivalry that in the past has been entertaining. So maybe it'll be that way again here in the future. So there's been plenty of crazy changes in college football over the past couple months. It is bowl season now. The playoffs have been approved for, I think it's the 24 season. So we do have one more year of the 14 playoff coming next year, but that has been approved. It's bowl season, so we have all that going on, and a bunch of crazy coaching changes. Deion Sanders going to Colorado after talks of South Florida being in the mix, Cincinnati being in the mix. So I think we could start there because that is definitely shaking up the college football landscape. A 1-11 Colorado team kind of striking gold and getting prime time to come to Boulder.
Yeah, and shoot, I mean, you're familiar with the FCS scene, being working and also watching Stetson football, so very familiar about the cool FCS system where they have for HBCUs a bowl game dedicated to the two best teams, one of each conference, MEAC and SWAC, in their bowl game at Atlanta, and then you have the rest of the FCS. And, an HBCU could obviously be in there in the FCS playoffs where they don't have a best of four. They have many, many rounds
to determine 16.
Yes, I believe at least 16. They got buys, I think. I'm not sure, but it's like a whole month of stuff. It's super cool. So with that being said, there's conversation about how Deion Sanders created a complicated or a legacy that isn't, that can be frowned upon because of how he left Jackson State after consecutive, conference championships. And to me, that's silly. I mean, how long was this guy supposed to stay there when he clearly was, capable of even going to the NFL and succeeding? I wouldn't be surprised if that's his move in a couple of years as well. One thing that is interesting to me is of all the schools that were rumored to get Deion Sanders and vying for Deion Sanders, Florida State wasn't one of them. Right. And he is a legend there. And Florida State could use that sort of boost, after their one national championship run about a decade ago. It would have been incredible to have this guy as a knight in shining armor, come in and save the program, bring in his son and create huge change. I think that would have been awesome. But outside of that, he deserves a big boost. He deserves an opportunity to, join a program like Colorado. And I mean, being 1-11 last year, any improvement would be a big boost for those fans.
Yeah, I think as far as the Florida State thing you mentioned, if you gave him truth serum, I think you don't root against your alma mater, but I don't think he was cheering too hard for Mike Norvell to make the turnaround that has obviously happened for the Seminoles this year. They're 9-3. They're going to Cheez-It Bowl against Oklahoma. Things are looking up for Tallahassee. And I think if he had it his way, maybe Mike Norvell has another kind of average season. They move on from him, and then they bring in Deion Sanders. But you can't fire a guy that just made a 5-game improvement. So Norvell seems to be the guy there for a while. You mentioned the way the FCS system is set up. I do believe, and at least this is how he was speaking, it sounded like he wanted to coach the Celebration Bowl, but I don't know if that's actually happening now. So that remains to be seen. Yeah. But I echo your sentiment of anyone that thought Deion Sanders was going to be a lifer at Jackson State, I think is a little naive. And I'm not saying just be grateful for the 2 years that he spent there. Because you can, if you're a Jackson State fan, which there's now more of them than there's ever been, let's be real, uh, you can be a little bummed that he's leaving. I totally get that. I mean, we've all dealt with coaches leaving our programs before we would maybe want them to, but to think he was going to stay there forever, I think the little bit that I do understand is like this was his first legitimate offer to leave, and I think I my only sentiment is I did think he'd be a little more picky on the D1 offer that he'd get, let's say. Like Florida State is an obvious one. There was rumors that Auburn was flirting with him. That's an SEC school. I get that.
Right.
Colorado, I'm 30 years old. I remember Colorado as a power. They did 2 years before I was born, they won a national championship. And then after that, they were just a solid team. I put them at the level of, I'll just grab a name out of the sky. They're about what like Kentucky is right now. They were that for a lot of my childhood. They were a solid bowl winning team, like just a solid program. So that's what I remember Colorado as. And they've of course since taken a dive. Um, but with Dion, it is a little head scratching. He has no connection to the area. People would have thought he wanted to take a Florida school or a Texas school or something like that. Or maybe Georgia Tech was rumored for so long because he was obviously a sports icon in Atlanta, and Georgia Tech is very nearby. So like that one made sense too. So while the destination is head scratching, it doesn't shock me that he made the move. It's just kind of where he made the move and how quickly he did. So I get people being like, you could have been a little more picky, could have hung around for one more year. Maybe there's better jobs. Like I could see that part of it. But to be saying that he just like used the school, this is a guy that, put half his salary back into the facilities. And even though Deion Sanders is gone, they will benefit from his 2 years
Oh
there
yeah.
for much, much longer. That are they going to go undefeated next year? Maybe not, but there will be a lasting
Considering the
impact.
guys they lost, probably not.
Sure,
But
sure, but
yeah.
like there's going to be a lasting impact of improvement from his 24 months spent there.
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with a better example of what happened, and a less tacky one, admittedly. But the best example is like, you date a supermodel who's ultra rich for 3 years. Are you going to be pissed when she breaks up with you when those are the 3 greatest years of your life? Probably not.
Right.
Um, and the other discussion about it too is, yes, a lot of attention is going to these, to Jackson State and whatnot, but how many of these recruits from other FCS programs left them, and how many FCS programs were even less relevant after what happened at Jackson State? This guy was larger than life, but I think he's in a good spot now. He's in a right spot now, being in, the FBS. Colorado, of course, it was not the first choice we selected, but
Sure.
the other thing to your point, which is an interesting conversation, how many of those rumors were actually legit? How many of these colleges really were fighting for him, simply because sometimes in college football, you get these owners that I would assume that want a guy that isn't going to dominate all the national headlines. They just want a coach that's going to, win games and not be the whole story. Maybe the owner wants to be part of the story or
Yeah.
whatnot, just speculation. But considering the rumors and how there were only like a handful of schools that were really rumored for this guy, it was a little interesting because he's definitely one of the great coaches that we have right now that was available.
I don't doubt that there was, some schools in the mix. I also don't doubt that, while some of them might have been interested in Dion, maybe it wasn't reciprocated. And I like, not to poke fun even further, but like South Florida, a lot of people were down here were saying that they were talking with Dion. I don't doubt there was maybe some communication, but I don't know how much he really considered that job. I mean, there was.
Hey, they were able to get his phone number, man. That counts,
Right. That's something for sure. But yeah, it's interesting to see who else it might have been. It being in the big they're not even in the Big 12, right? They're in the Pac-12, right? Colorado's in the Pac-12.
For
So
now.
for
I
now,
mean,
for
who
now,
knows?
that's I'm thinking ahead, I guess. So it's a very winnable conference moving forward. We'll see what happens with them. There are people, I grew up 25 minutes from an HBCU. It's this university called Bethune-Cookman, Nick. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. So like I've always been aware of HBCUs, but there are people in this country that just learned about, that whole subsection of college football in the 2 years that Dion was at Jackson State. So again, back to echo what I said a minute ago, his lasting effect on just the concept of HBCU football is going to be known forever. So, like, granted, he didn't stay there for 10 years. He didn't become their Bobby Bowden, but I don't know that that was ever his plan. And I think if you'd asked him back then, I don't think he would have ever said, my goal is to be here for 20 years. I don't think that was ever the plan.
And how much, we could leave with this. How much would Jackson State, HBCUs, and everything involved would have gained from him staying much longer? He won back-to-back conference titles. It would have been nice if he finished the Celebration Bowl and then announced. But that brings up a whole other debate about how it seems like a lot of these coaching decisions are made before the playoffs are over. That's for NFL, and that is also for college. I wish there's no coaching change until after the season, just my preference. But how much additional attention and how much additional notoriety would have been gained to Jackson State and HBCUs, considering how much time? There was so much gained in 3 years. Is he really responsible for staying forever? And also, what extra benefit would have been for staying longer? He dominated. He was clearly the best HBCU for 2 years. He did literally whatever he would have before he got the job. He would have taken this type of 3-year stint for sure. Anybody would have.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, again, the Celebration Bowl remains to be seen. He initially talked like, the job's not finished yet. We got one more. If I'm Colorado, I'm sure part of the deal, he might have been like, I have to finish this over here. Because you talk about accomplishments, that's the one thing he didn't do yet. Last year, they had a good year. They went, I think, 9-2, and they won the SWAC. But they were upset in the Celebration Bowl against South Carolina State. So if you're talking about accomplishments, that really is the one thing left to win. So if I'm Dion and I care about this, and it seems like he does, he would want to be in that last bowl game. Maybe we'll know more information about that soon. It sounded like he wants to coach it, and there's nothing, it's not like Colorado's gearing up for a bowl game anytime soon. So he has the time to do it. He might have to do a little recruiting in the meantime, but we'll have to see for that. I do want to talk about there's a lot of coaching changes, but the one other I wanted to bring up, I think I would put at the top of it, is Luke Fickell leaving Cincinnati, who's going into the Big 12 with UCF. They were the first Power 5 school to actually make the college football playoffs. So a lot of great accomplishments. Talk about accomplishments that Luke Fickell had with the Bearcats. Moving on to Wisconsin. Do you see this as a good move, a lateral move, a bad move? Should he have stayed at Cincinnati? What do you think?
It's actually very similar to the Deion Sanders thing, where it's he basically maximized how great that program can be, in my opinion, considering the conference they were in and whatnot, and the location they were in too. This was not Texas, Florida, California recruits. This is Cincinnati, Ohio, and yes, Ohio is still one of those blue blood states. But it's incredible the accomplishments that he had for years and years. He joins a program that's already accomplished. We had our conversation in our last podcast together about how Scott Frost has one magical season and believes he can conquer the world and goes to a fledgling program. This is not a fledgling program. Wisconsin is very similar to Cincinnati in what they do in their conference. A very strong program. Maybe Kentucky would be an understatement considering what Wisconsin's been able to accomplish. So this is, I think, a great fit, great transition, and I'm excited to see what he can accomplish in Wisconsin.
With not thinking about it for very long, I would consider Wisconsin like the Ole Miss of the Big Ten. Maybe third, fourth, out of the 12 teams that are in there. Wisconsin, to me, talking about Scott Frost, has always been like, if Nebraska was ran well, they would be Wisconsin. Like that's the disconnect right there. So I agree. I think he kind of accomplished everything he could have. Winning the American and making it to the playoff, there's almost nowhere to go but down. So your draft stock, if you will, is at an all-time high. So I definitely understand why he would make that move and why he would do it now. And that is, of course, created a domino effect of Scott Sutterfield going from Louisville to take the coaching job at Cincinnati, which is interesting because they play in a bowl game in about 3 weeks. So that's going to be an interesting one. And that's led to Jeff Brom, the Purdue coach, going to Louisville, so on and so forth. The dominoes are falling, and there's probably more coaching hires that need to be made. But I think those are the top ones that needed to be discussed here today.
Yeah, that's pretty hilarious. Okay, so whoever wins the bowl game, he's going to be pretty excited and
Yeah.
pissed at the same time.
Yeah, I
So
feel like he gets a bowl ring either way in this instance, right?
right,
So he's just going to be because he obviously doesn't coach either team due to this scenario. He's in the press box with the Cincinnati folks, I guess in this case. So he's just sitting up there, probably getting his ring sized, and he's going to get one either way. So that's definitely something that's going on.
right. But yeah, it's just the overall movement. I mean, I don't have any big opposition to anybody going anywhere. It's just before the bowl games, and now there's this huge complication. I mean, college football is already crazy enough with the transfer portal and guys, basically getting bribed by other colleges while they're in the middle of playing games.
Yeah.
And then now we got coaches moving all over the place. It's like I'm not those old folks get off my lawn, what's up with loyalty anymore. I understand that, if a player wants more playing time, if a coach feels there's a better situation, or he likes one situation more than another, then of course, but just it would be nice if a lot of this happened not right before the team's biggest game of the season. Just my preference.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, and I was going to go there next anyway. So let's talk transfer portal. Monday was the true opening of it. We have seen over 1,000 players on all levels, D1, D2, FCS, everything else, uh, into the portal in the past 72 hours. In years past, the statistics have shown that 40% of transfer portal players find a new school. So that's not good odds. That
Yeah.
is 600 or so out of the 1,000 might not
Probably
get to play.
100% of the players believe they're in that 40%. That's the other thing.
That is the issue for sure. And like you mentioned, one thing for the portal to open before bowl season is kind of an issue. I would like in the future to see, the first bowl is I think on the 16th, December 16th. The national championship is what, January, usually the first Monday of January, if I remember correctly. So
I think the semis are the first, or no, it's New Year's Eve, and then I believe the second Monday.
you're right. Okay. So
Um,
let's call it January like 21st. That
right.
Tuesday or Wednesday. That's when the portal should open. That way everybody has to, kind of see through the journey that they set for in 2022. That is something I would like to see. And while I feel like I'm not the old man get off my lawn person, I'm definitely more towards it than maybe others because I'm just one of those.
Can you at least stand on the edge of my lawn? That'd be
Sure,
great.
right, yeah, you can hang out a little bit, but it's just if you're not getting playing time, like you just said, I'm going to echo it. Like I get it. If maybe you had an injury, you lost your job, you never really saw the field, you want to transfer closer to home. You're a spread quarterback, and a new coach comes in, and now you're running a pro style offense. All those things I get. But when you're a starter at a D1 program and you decide to leave, and then the next level that I've seen today, this past 2 days, team captains, guys that had C's on their jersey this year, are transferring.
Yeah.
That's an issue to me. And again, maybe I'm the old man yelling at clouds. That is an issue when team captains are transferring. And granted, I do want to state this point. We'll never have a crazier transfer portal than this year. Because on top of everything, 70% of these players are dealing with the COVID year. So a lot of these guys are guys that have played 4 years, but have one more year of Ryan O'Keefe, star wide receiver at UCF. He's played 4 years at UCF. I remember him as a freshman. This is his senior year. He does have 1 year left, and he's transferring using that. So you could argue with someone like that, you did your 4 year commitment to this school. He's from Texas. Maybe he's going to go play at a Texas school. Who knows? So that's a little bit different. So if there's 1,000 players in the portal, I could say 300 of them are probably only there because they have a 5th year. So if you could chop a third of it off maybe for next year. So I think that's worth repeating. But still, on top of that, it has been wild, and I do think eventually people will realize, because once you're in the portal, if people don't know this, if Nick plays at Arizona State and he goes in the portal, you do have the option to go back to that school, but your scholarship is not guaranteed. If in the time you were floating out in the portal, they offered it to some other new kid, like you just don't get to go back. So
Wow.
it's a risk, and as we mentioned earlier, only 40% find new homes, and that's at any level. So you might leave a P5 and end up going to an FCS just because that's who will have you, and
Mm.
that's not even a testament necessarily to your talent level. That could just be what they have available. Every school has 85 scholarships. That's all they have. and that's including their high school recruits coming in. Those are the kids that are really getting hurt the most because coaches are
Yes,
recruiting less high
absolutely.
school kids because they got to leave. Every year you get, I think it's 23 scholarships. It's in the 20s somewhere.
Mhm.
And you used to use 20 of them on high school kids, maybe get 3 transfers. Now you're using like 15 of them because you want to bring in 7 guys that have had starting experience at Colorado State or something, and Auburn, and now he goes to Auburn or something. So really, it trickles down all the way to the high school kids, and now there's just going to be less to go around. And I do think eventually it'll calm out a little bit, but this is absolute madness we've seen in the past 3 days.
Yeah, what stinks is that the whole nature of building the transfer portal was to create more parity. And it seems like the opposite is starting to happen where power schools are just saying, "Hey, we know that you're a team captain here, but we got $1 million or whatever. Come to our school and we'll make you a team captain here," something like that. Just a huge shame in that regard. And then when you add in that, coaches are leaving before the season's even over, players can leave in the middle of the season and whatnot. I mean, it's madness. Yes, the COVID year could kind of reduce a little bit,
Yeah.
but and you're hearing from a lot of experts, it's going to get even more wild before they finally figure this thing out. And they better figure it out soon, because this is starting to not even feel like college football to a certain extent, just a bidding war. Whoever has the most money and has the best sales pitch. And shout out to all those players who stayed because they believe in the coach and the program, because those are becoming a smaller minority over time with a lot of these guys leaving.
Like, do you remember the days when like your third year, your hot stuff junior running back, foregoed his senior year to go into the draft, and that was a big deal at the time. Now,
Yep.
if you leave and go to the draft, the fans are happy because at least they don't have to see you play at another school. They can go cheer for you on Sunday. So that's the
Mhm.
difference there too. And
And also, if you actually played your final game of the year, that's another
that
really
is
weird thing that you
absolutely.
did.
I mean, there's guys. I think there was a USC receiver, Ohio State receiver that's not playing in the playoff. Like we're skipping playoff games now. I
Not
forget his
just
name,
not just
but
bowl games. Nope.
yeah, playoff games, national championships. To what end? Is it going to happen? But there are 2 different portals. I forget how long. I think this one lasts like 15 days or something, and then another one comes up right after spring camp. So basically, you have two. Basically, you get to go through the fall camp. Excuse me. Basically, after spring games are played is when there's another 15-day window. And to tell you how ridiculous it can be,
Yeah,
last
that's
year when I
ridiculous.
was at UCF spring game, we had a wide receiver, Jalen Robinson, nicknamed Flash. I watched him score a touchdown in the spring game. The next morning, he's in the transfer portal. I'm like, what's the deal here? This dude goes to
Yeah.
Ole Miss. He was a starting wide receiver at UCF. This past year, he played at Ole Miss. He made 5 catches for 29 yards. That's the risk you run when you. So it's not only do you have to run the risk of like even finding a home, but then like, are you even going to be used when you get there? Is the other issue. Because yes, okay, congrats, you're there. Now you're behind 6 dudes that have been in the system for 2 years.
Yeah.
Talent doesn't solve it all.
So here on Phil Talk Sports, me and Phil don't just come present the issues. We provide solutions. All right. And I haven't thought about this too long, so I'm
Mhm.
sure my solution and yours might change. But my opinion, first, if we gotta have 2 different transfer portals, I'd say one is before or at the end of the season, you have right after the national championship, let's have coaches and players all have their 15 days of fame where they can go
Yep.
transfer to wherever they want to. And then I believe there should be another window, maybe a little smaller, right after high school recruiting day, which I think is mid-February, something like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like high school kids,
And that's
they put
another
on the
thing because now
hats.
there's early signing day and regular signing day, but we don't have time to get into that. But yes, I get
Right,
what you're
right.
saying. Yeah.
But to that effect, and then it's locked, so coaches don't have to be recruiting through spring ball, through fall camp. Coaches have enough of a workload doing the during the season sales pitch to keep your own guys on your roster. I think that is as good of a solution as we could get, and shoot, that's a whole lot better than the solution they have right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the right track. Basically, after bowl season, and then somewhere in the fall camp era of after the spring game in the recruiting era. We're basically saying the same thing, so I agree with that. And when you mention these like collectives that are going on now, I had a coworker today that he's an FSU fan, and he explained to me that Florida State is getting ahead of this thing where they now have two collectives. One is about recruiting new players to come in, and there's a whole nother collective just to retain the players they already have. And I think that's
Yeah.
actually really smart that they're getting out ahead of it like that. So shout out to RJ for letting me know about that. That's definitely a strategy that people are going to need to take in the future, but it definitely remains to be seen. While we have a few minutes left in this segment before we jump to the NFL, normally this would dominate the news, but with everything going on, it's almost, and it is because it's a couple years away, but it is official that we are moving to the 12-team playoff in 2024 for college football. When you first heard that, obviously it's something that's been on the table for a while. They finally decided to put the stamp of approval on it. Do you think 12 is the right number? Do you like where this is going? Are you happy about it? Would you rather it be the way it is now? What's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I heard Paul Feinbaum, ESPN, watching him that he
That guy still
wanted.
has a show.
I somehow, some way, he said I'd rather have the BCS, and he didn't get kicked off right then and there. Like, are you serious?
You know what I
Okay.
liked about the BCS is it was flawed, but everybody agreed it was flawed, and they're just like, this is what we got. So nobody was standing there saying this is the best we can come up with. They're just like, this is what we got. So
It
continue.
did feel less opinionated and more,
Yeah,
okay, the numbers say these are the two best. And
exactly.
it
So if you
wasn't
didn't agree with the numbers, that's one thing, but that's what they were,
right. So, I mean, I get it, but going to 12, I guess the positive is that it'll feel less like subjective, because it's like, hey, listen, you could argue if you're 13th or if you're 9th, but the point is, like, you're not even close to being a national champion. So why,
Yeah.
you and most likely, I would assume in like 15 years, if you're not a top 5 seed, I don't think any of the 6 through 12 are going to even win the whole thing anyways. But at least now there won't be, I mean, don't count on it, but I think there's going to be far less argument now, like of joining the playoff. And I think some teams will be like, shoot, I'd rather play in the biggest New Year's 6 game than play in the playoff. I guess that's another argument. So to
Yeah.
me, I think 8 would have been the best number, but 12 is fine. We can work with 12.
I always liked 8. I always thought the top 6, really the whole thing I've been preaching since I've had this show, that like you're winning your conference should matter. So that maybe the top 6 conference champions and then 2 wild cards. That would be good to me. Because that way the conference championships are de facto playoff games. And this is something that like Curb Street's been on for a while, and I've agreed with it ever since I heard it. So that's something I could see. We'll see how this goes. Obviously, we got a couple years before it truly takes effect. But it's never going to please everybody. I mean, when March Madness comes around, there's 64 schools in that. They add that extra 4 little play-in tournament, and we're watching the show on first 4 in, first 4 out. And there's, the 69th best team in the country just had their heart broken that they didn't get in. It's like, it sucks you didn't get in, but you're 69th best team in the country. Like, I don't feel so bad. You win more games at that point. So like, there is a limit. Nobody's ever going to be fully happy about it, but maybe it's a step in the right direction. The only issue with it is they're never going to retract it from 12. So 6 or 8 might have been a better place to start. It's funny how we went from 2 to 4 to 12. I feel like there was some middle ground that we jumped over. Just my opinion, but yeah, it will be crazy, and we'll have plenty of years to talk about this system before it even comes into effect. So
the thing that's I think part of the 12 argument too, which is like behind closed doors, is they're probably saying, what we can see in 5 years is that these college programs are going to be pissed that they have to play an additional playoff game. So they say the great teams have a bye. Most likely the ones who didn't have a bye won't make it to the national championship anyways. But you're right, it's flawed. It's like, okay, now we go from teams playing 13 to playing 15 games, and it's like, yeah, certain guys get paid, but other guys won't. So it's like, get paid or get 2 extra games, more risk for injury, and I didn't really get paid for anything.
Speaking of money, that those first rounds are played on campus, so that's a lot of extra money going to the schools that host that first round thing. And you got to be a conference champion to be a top 6 seed. So that means no matter how good Notre Dame is, they're never gonna, unless they join a conference, they're never gonna be a top 6 seed.
Yeah,
so
God forbid they do that.
Yeah, that's something they might have to think about here. Guys, we're gonna take a quick break and then jump over to the NFL. Deshaun Watson's return. How good are the Eagles? What is the 49ers quarterback situation? Why are the Rams so bad? All this and more coming up after a quick break. All right, and we're back going to talk some NFL football. Crazy week of that as well. Tipped off with, I don't think any bigger highlight for one particular game than the return to football for Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns, of all teams, going back to Houston to play his old team, the Texans, which there's no way when they made the suspension that they didn't plan.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
why wasn't it 12 games? Why wasn't it 10? This is why, so that they could open up with this game. And you know, I kind of watched Red Zone this week. That's kind of how I did it. So I didn't see everything in this game. I don't know if you followed anything about this.
Oh no, red zone's it. That's the way to watch nowadays.
I've never in my life seen a team with no offense put up 27 points. And here's how they did it. Cleveland scores a punt return touchdown with Donovan Peoples-Jones, then a fumble recovery touchdown with Denzel Ward, 3 field goals, and a pick six by Tony Fields II. So that is how they got their 27 points. And I think it's incredible that, and we talked earlier, like people should have been naive about Dion. If you thought Deshaun Watson was going to come out there and not miss a step after not playing for virtually 2.5, closer to 3 years, then that's a little naive as well. He looked as rusty as you'd expect, but for the Browns to just like score 27 points without, like, we could have been at quarterback and they would have scored the exact same amount of points because none of them came on offense. That's crazy.
It's also crazy. First of all, that Deshaun Watson wouldn't miss a step after he missed every step in the preseason is another thing. And then also what's crazy, I didn't do it either. I'm just thinking now, I'm wondering how many times, if ever, has there been 3 non-offensive touchdowns scored in a game? I don't know. Yeah. That might be something for a research team for next time. But
for sure.
But with Deshaun, this was clearly one of the most, if it wasn't for his return, would have been one of the most boring games ever. One of the worst ways to debut your return to the NFL. And, you know, even with all the drama that happened with him and how much of that was legit, how much of it isn't, you know, he is still, when healthy and when, you know, obviously playing a full season, one of the special talents that we've seen in the game in a long, long time. And when he gets it going, granted, you know, it's a fully guaranteed deal, so Cleveland has no other choice.
Right.
This team should be really, really good. Not this year, of course, but next year, I think the Browns could be pretty special with him because, I mean, similar to Houston, you see what Houston is without Deshaun Watson. That literally was Cleveland before Baker. And they're a little bit more equipped now to become, you know, a legit playoff contending team. So I believe that soon enough that'll happen. But in the meantime, yeah, there's going to be a couple more of these clunkers.
Would not shock me if Baker ends up in Houston after all this is all said and done. It would just be funny if that's how that ended up going. See, the Browns before the year, Browns fans, I should say, were like, you know, and this team was starting to rally around Jacoby, especially after they beat Tampa the week before. But they were like, you know, if Jacoby can get us right around 500, you know, then Deshaun can come in and we can sneak in. And it's more so what you said. The rest of the season is just to equate Deshaun Watson back into the game of football. And then next year is when whatever move they're trying to make, it'll actually happen next year. I think anyone that thinks they're going to make something drastic would have to happen in order for, I know the Ravens aren't exactly running away with the division. The Bengals they started slow. They seem to have picked it up a little bit. So the Bengals probably end up with that division. So it's not as runaway as you'd have thought. But yeah, if I'm the if I'm the Browns, this is all practice for next year.
Nothing personal to the fine folks in Cleveland, but I've been to a lot of games, and I got to say, Cleveland Browns fans are the most delusional, most absolutely insane fans I've ever been around. And granted, I just went to one game. I didn't go to a whole season. I didn't go to a Browns game in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. The most delusional. They probably think they're going to make the playoffs and go on a run.
Yeah, I mean, especially after that. I mean, if the defense and special teams plays that way, they can't lose a game. Because if the offense does anything, you know, that's so, you know, just a crazy game. Definitely something, you know, just the way it happened that he happened to be playing Houston. This game wouldn't be on our radar at all if not for the Deshaun Watson thing. So it deserved to be mentioned. But otherwise, Both teams are out of the mix. Houston is probably getting the number one pick at this rate. So I don't want to spend too much time talking on them, but it definitely deserved to be brought up.
It seems like the number one pick is not the shoe-in that it's been in previous years. Last year was the same year. It's like, who knows who's going to be that top guy?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, are they going to go quarterback if it's Houston? Are they going to look to get like someone like Baker or whatever, a stopgap, Jimmy G, whatever? But there'll be plenty of time for draft talk here in the future. Let's move to two teams towards the bottom of the standings, to the team that's at the top of the standings, my team to be exact. Philadelphia Eagles 11-1. When I did my return podcast, I had to do it on like Sunday morning before any of these games because that's just when I had time to do it. So I mentioned in that this, I had to keep it kind of evergreen because I didn't want to talk about games that were about to happen. So I said, even if the Eagles, let's say they lose to the Titans, they're still 10-2 and they're still the best record in the league, not the worst place to be. I did not expect, I'm not saying I didn't think we could beat the Titans. I did not expect AJ Brown to absolutely commit genocide on the Tennessee secondary like he did. And clearly that was a game that mattered a lot to him, and they got it done for him, and he was a big part of that. So that puts us again at 11-2. I'm sorry, 11-1, in the best record in the league. Before I give any of my opinions, because I don't want my opinions to influence your opinions, you've seen the Eagles all year. Are they as good as the record shows, and are they as good as advertised? Because I think a lot of people don't think so.
Yeah, well, I know Tennessee is not the number one seed that they were last year. So we're just going to, throw that out there. But to me, this was the game that impressed me almost as much as any. And they have a lot of wins early in the season, right? Mm-hmm. But it's after they lost to Washington where the team could just, mail it in, considering they're probably going to get the number one seed regardless. Dallas would have to do something crazy to get that. And, Minnesota's nipping on their heels, of course, but at least for the division.
But we do have the tiebreaker because we beat them.
Right.
So there is that. Yeah.
But it's after the loss. To me, that was the game where I no longer look at them as the team that got embarrassed in Tampa last year in the playoffs. And now I look at this as a team that improved in a big, big way and also acquired Linval Joseph and Adama Kungsu in order to bolster one of the very few weaknesses they have on their football team, which is, stopping the run. And ironically, that all of a sudden became a major strength against Derrick Henry. They are legit. This team is a Super Bowl caliber club. And the only thing is have one major question, and that's with a head coach that has yet to do much and a quarterback that has also yet to do much. We don't know how they'll look in year two in the playoffs, but considering how they looked to close out year one, I'd say that you can only go up, and that experience has to help. So I believe this team is going to be very, very good in the playoffs.
I've never been so happy to be wrong about Jalen Hurts and anything in that sense. I do think it is Jalen Hurts fits perfectly in what we are doing as a team. I'm not trying to talk negative about him, even with all the positive that's going on. I don't see him as somebody that, you drop him in any team, in any system, and he's doing all the same thing. I think the team we have is perfect for the guys that we have. And I will go as far as to say, with MVP conversations, I don't know who's on Jalen's level. I think it's Jalen, and then I think it's Mahomes and Josh Allen, maybe, kind of in that second tier. Tua, if he didn't have injuries, because at the end of the day, that's going to be a tiebreaker. This guy missed 3-4 games. These guys didn't. So he'll be maybe the third tier, and then everybody else. So unless something drastic happens, I don't know how Jalen doesn't win MVP, which is something I never thought I would say at the beginning of the year.
Crazy?
And it's crazy what can happen in 12 games. And the other thing I would say about it too is we have a 2-game lead on the Cowboys with 5 left. So something drastic would have to happen. And of course, the difference between that is the 1 seed and the 5 seed. That's a big drop. So it's not like you can fall asleep at the wheel because you don't want to drop 4 playoff spots. So if you keep it, the road to the Super Bowl goes through Philly. You never have to leave until you go to, I think it's in Phoenix, actually, the Super Bowl.
Yep.
So they would have that issue. They wouldn't have that issue, I should say. The Vikings, like you said, nipping on the heels, already beat them once. You'd have confidence going in them again. We thought that the game against Dallas on Christmas Eve or day, whichever it is, was going to be huge. there might be a point where that game doesn't even matter much to us. Not a guarantee, because if we drop one, then they're right back in it. But between then and there, we have the Giants coming up, another divisional game. And while I was annoyed with the slip up against Washington, now you don't even have the pressure of an undefeated season. So you just can hang loose and do the rest of it. All things pointing well for the Eagles, in my opinion, at this point.
I would be a little stressed about how that young team with the young coach would handle a playoff bye, but I mean, if you're guaranteed home field advantage against a NFC field that's littered with quarterbacks that have very little to no playoff experience, Kirk Cousins for Minnesota, Brock Purdy for San Francisco, Dak Prescott is legit, but his playoff resume is hit and miss,
right?
You know, and then the rest, whoever else wraps up the wild card spots. I'd say this is the year where the conference is wide open. And we knew it before the season. It was kind of like we made our preseason predictions and it was like very little confidence in a lot of these guys. Like, I guess maybe Green Bay, maybe Tampa, I don't know,
right.
Maybe Philly. We were just talking if they could win the NFC East. So I think the story of before the year is kind of playing out where it's wide open and the Eagles, considering that it's outside of Tom Brady and Tampa, and the battle of quarterbacks and a battle of teams recently, pretty much there's a lot of new crops coming in, and we'll see which one has the moxie to get it done.
And it's a valid point about like the young guys, can they handle the first round bye situation? But there is enough veterans on this team. There's still guys on that D line that played in the Super Bowl, 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. It's crazy it's been that long already. But Fletcher Cox is still there, Brandon Graham is still there. There's guys that can tell you like, hey, we've been here and this is how you do it right. So I'm
Fair point.
Is it a guarantee? No, because it is that wide open, and like that Washington game, hopefully other refs know what face masks look like. Hopefully other quarterbacks don't fall to the ground while in the process of getting sacked and draw a flag like they're drawing a charge in the NBA. Assuming those things don't happen, things are looking good, I gotta say.
Well, to me, okay, let's look at the NFC field. All right, and if Philadelphia does not represent the NFC in the Super Bowl, what team would we be shocked or surprised to beat them, or what team do we think really has a chance? To me, if the Giants or Washington beat them in the playoffs, I would be totally stunned. San Francisco is a team that I think is scary. Even though their record doesn't show it, they're
built for the playoffs.
They're built. So
if they get in, it's as good as anything else. Yeah, absolutely.
So I wouldn't be stunned if they beat Philly. And to me, if Dallas beat them, I'd be surprised, but I wouldn't be totally floored because of how talented they are. But I still don't believe them in the playoffs.
Like if you told me you have to put money on an NFC team to make the Super Bowl and you can't pick the Eagles, I guess I'm picking the Vikings if you make me pick somebody else. Because they're very talented.
I still would be a little surprised. I like there's just something about them. Their point differential is right about even. They are 10-2, but they are this close to being like 7-5,
right,
or something like that. A couple, against Buffalo last week. I forget who they played. Goal line pick. The Jets were driving to win the game.
Jets,
it's like they're this close to losing like 4 games. So to me, San Francisco is the only, to me, super legit challenge where they're on their level. And I think Dallas is a hair behind them. And then I'd really be shocked if anybody else beat them. Minnesota, Giants, Washington, even Tampa with Tom Brady. I'd be shocked if any of them beat Philly in the playoffs.
I agree. And, one team that we expected to be in the mix in the NFC and is nowhere near it is the LA Rams, the defending Super Bowl champions. We just talked about why the Eagles are so good. Why do you think the Rams are so bad?
There goes at least for now, and I get it, coaches have bad years, but there is the crown of boy genius Sean McVay, maybe not being quite the overwhelming genius that we thought when he had prime Ramsey, prime Aaron Donald, prime Andrew Whitworth, prime, so many incredible players on that team. This it even shocks me, and I live about an hour and a half away from LA, and I've been to SoFi and involved with that. But when they acquired Bobby Wagner and they returned a lot of the brass, I'm surprised because they have the talent to be obviously way better. But on Phil Talk Sports, we brought it up before the year. The Rams are making too much noise about the coach that might not want to coach because, he's in a contract dispute. Aaron Donald might not want to return because, he would rather retire on top as a Super Bowl champion.
Right.
How embarrassing if he retires after this year.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, there was
no more Odell, who was a big part of that offense.
Right. Way too much noise. And I think that this kind of reminded me of Green Bay when Aaron Rodgers was flirting with retirement a time or two. I was kind of shocked that they won 13 games last year. Just way too much noise, and they were sipping too much of that Kool-Aid after that Super Bowl championship. I'm not surprised that they struggled, but obviously having the worst Super Bowl defense of all time, that is surprising.
Yeah, and I mean, if you ask a Rams fan if you can actually find a legit one and you ask him, like, is it worth it? They would say, yeah, because you got a ring out of it. But, like, it's going to be, and, they have no first-round picks until about, Nick, you might have another degree by the time they have a first-round pick again. So you never know what's going to happen with that. Was it worth it? Yes, because they won the Super Bowl. But on top of all the issues you just mentioned, Matthew Stafford isn't even playing, and when he was, he's looked like a zombie this year. So, maybe that's another guy that might retire sooner than we thought. We thought he had a good, 3, 4, 5 years left. Might be more like 1 or 2 if this keeps up. Because on top of the poor play, there's the injuries now that he's dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And this brings up a bigger point. I think the NFL this year proved that the gunslinger and the big cannon arm is a little overrated. And this is speaking as a Justin Herbert guy, and as a Chargers fan. I mean, look at all the great arms in the league. Aaron Rodgers, another one of them, where they just can beat you with the long ball. They can wow social media and ESPN and SportsCenter with all these incredible long touchdowns. But we see Tom Brady inching Tampa into the playoffs with his dink and dunk style check down. Jalen Hurts, we mentioned, and Matthew Stafford, his long arm, the same problem, albeit winning a Super Bowl last year, is rearing its head here. And Detroit fans are saying, I told you, there's a reason, at least a little bit. Yes, the Lions are awful, but,
sure.
Matthew Stafford, part of the problems was, his lackadaisical, careless play at times. And it really reared its head early in the year. So the gunslinger, long distance, strong arm quarterback might not be as valuable as we used to think.
Yeah, no, that's very possible. That just the way the league is, it's obviously something good to have, but you need that short and intermediate just as much, to the point that those guys are actually performing better than, the guys you just mentioned. We were going to talk a little bit about the 49ers situation. We kind of touched on that already. We don't know how far Brock Purdy is going to take them. So I'm going to switch that topic out.
Still legit.
The team itself is legit. But it's a matter of, how, and there's also Jimmy G. Maybe his foot isn't broken. That's a story that broke today. So we'll see what happens with that. So that we might have to bring that up at another time. So instead, we'll close it. We opened on my team. Let's close on yours. The Chargers are 6-6. And I'm happy to know that they're going to make a bowl game this year, but they're going to need a little bit more if they want to make the playoffs. What's going on with them? Every time they have a good, they seem to be, 1 step forward, 2 steps back all year. What's been going on with them?
Yeah, that's kind of what happens when you have a coach who is going through his first rodeo. This team is talented enough to be right in there with like the Jets, right there to compete with, the top wild card spot in the conference. But when you got a coach like Brandon Staley, unfortunately, you're going to lose. I was shocked that Vegas was favored last week against the Chargers by 2.5.
Right.
And when LA jumped out to a 10-0 lead, I'm saying, see, exactly. And then they absolutely implode. And if it wasn't for a miraculous 4th down score from Keenan Allen, that game wasn't close. So we've had too many of those this year as a Chargers fan, way too many. We play great for a half, great for a quarter. We either come out slow, we just completely sleep at the wheel on once we have a lead. And to me, that's coaching. And I've been saying this for like 15 years, and it's getting very frustrating. The Chargers go cheap on coach, and it bites them in the behind in the end, where they just don't have the coach, don't have the personnel to compete. So the Chargers have the talent to be 9-3, but we're 6-6. and that's the way it's been for a long time.
What you went to a Charger game recently? Which game?
And we got smoked by Seattle. We lost by like 30.
Yeah, so I mentioned in my comeback episode, like Seattle, they're like barely over 500, but like they feel like world beaters because nobody. I would have had them in like a top 3 draft pick position this year, you know. So like what Geno Smith has done for Seattle is just incredible, and they're like 7-5. They're not doing anything spectacular. We just thought they were going to be terrible, and the fact that they're not is crazy. So back to the Chargers, though, you mentioned, you know, it's a lot of Staley issues. At what point does it fall back on Justin Herbert? Does the up and coming, soon to be superstar thing morph more
Great
into
question.
like, does he get Matthew Stafford disease where it's like, we know this guy's talented, but he has a ceiling? At what point does that take effect?
A phenomenal question, because we've seen 3 years of this and his stats have gone not plateaued, they've gone down. He's getting worse as a quarterback after 3 years. How much of that is coaching? How much of that is one of those 1-year wonder type of things where his rookie season was so spectacular that our opinion of him kind of changes? Charger social media wants Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, fired. They want a whole new change. And granted, this year, it's not all coaching. So that argument I made was a little vague, because we have been the most injured team in the league this year, which just kind of seemed like the story for the last decade. We might want to look into that. But even with like Mike Williams missing half the year, Keenan Allen missing some time, you still have maybe the greatest receiving back in the league. You had this offensive line started the season with 2 Pro Bowlers, 1 first-team All-Pro on it, Corey Linsley at center. So to say that he doesn't have the talent to average more than, say, 5 yards an attempt in half of his games seems a little insane to me. So yes, part of it's coaching, but I think the question is great, and I'm leaving your question a little unanswered, unfortunately. But I think there's still a little to be determined. But yes, I believe that there is something to that. Herbert is not playing up to his ability, and that kind of reminds me, being a fan of the Lakers, of Anthony Davis. He has MVP talent, but this guy, some of it's starting to fall on his shoulders, and rightfully so. He's not performing right now.
31 touchdowns his rookie year, 38 last year, and he's only sitting at 20 with about 5 games to go. So you hit the nail on the head. Not even plateauing, but even declining a little bit. We'll see what he ends up with. And of course, total touchdown doesn't tell the whole story, but it's a good indication on the direction that things are going. Can make a lot of big things happen when they play the Dolphins this coming week, because there's a chance that Tua doesn't play in that game. I mentioned earlier he'd be much more in the MVP conversation, but he's missed about a few more games, I think. But Nick, I think this is where we say goodbye. I appreciate you being on the show, man. And it's been 2 months since we got to do this, so I'm so happy we're able to be back, and I'm glad we're back doing these again, man.
All right. Well, next time I got to see Trigger through there. He made an appearance out there in the corner, but I want to see a little more of him next time, hopefully.
Sometimes he hops on the bed. I guess he's a little camera shy. He got used to not being on camera, so he's got to work his confidence back.
He's got to work through the rust too, man. So
that's for all you guys. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure you tell a friend that we are back, and we're back to doing episodes on the regular. So I appreciate you listening, and we'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.